Blueprint for Change. A plan to overcome challenges. Blueprint for Change. A guide to help create opportunities. Blueprint for Change. Thought-provoking conversations. Blueprint for Change. Why wait when you can contribute to the Blueprint for Change?
Welcome to Blueprint for Change, the show designed to help you change your perspective on how you think about national issues facing the Bahamas. The show tonight was delayed slightly because of the COVID-19 press conference put on by the Ministry of Health. I trust everyone had an opportunity to tune in and get the very valuable updates concerning this pandemic the world is facing, and specifically what's happening here in the Bahamas. So I am your host, Michael Diggiss, co-host Happy Dale, Happy Knowles. He is joining us, and we are going to have an interesting conversation, Happy, with a guest. And I think this is fortuitous because on the show last week, Happy, you introduced this whole notion about mindset. And coincidentally, I read Consider This article by my good friend, Phil Galanis. And I said, wow, I said to Happy, we have to have Phil on the show to talk about mindsets, because his series of articles actually is going to be focusing exactly on that. And his article that is in The Guardian, I think The Guardian today, is talking about a particular mindset he's asking us to consider as we move and or try to navigate through these challenges. So, Happy, are you there?
Yes. You can't hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good day, Bahamas, and thank you, Mike, for welcoming again. Today is a blessed day. We got the sun shining bright and crystal blue seas, fresh air, and intelligent people that we're going to talk to tonight. And so we ask these things in his name. But as we go through this discussion on the mindset in the New Build series to get on success as we move forward, we know that COVID has been a big player in disrupting our lives. So we have our body, minds, and souls that were disrupted. But one of the big things that has been disrupted, in addition to that, is the economy. And so we've asked to get a guest to come on to talk about the economy. And before we do that, we would like to say that, Eleanor Roosevelt said that great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. Well, we have three questions that we want to address during this session. And that is, what will the economy look like in the new built environment? What mindset is needed to thrive in the new built environment? And what needs to change in the present built environment for that mindset to transform our economy? So we will be dwelling into those things as we move forward. And Mike, if you would be so kind as to introduce the guests.
Of course. And I know, Happy, not to put too much pressure on my friend, but I like the way you set that up. So, but I'm sure he's up for the challenge. He's never been afraid of any challenge that has been put before him. So, Phil Galanis, I hope you are willing to take on the challenge posed to you by Happy.
Absolutely, Mike. I'm here, Happy. Thank you very much for those questions. Let's take them in the order in which you want to discuss them. But first, let me thank you for inviting me on this evening. I started the series of resetting a mindset last week, actually, because I recognized that although a lot of people are complaining and pointing fingers and blaming and trying to attribute causation or causality to what has happened or what has not happened, I think more importantly than looking at what has transpired and who is at fault for what has transpired or who's not at fault, it takes more imagination, vision, and visioning in order for us to understand how we're going to get out of this. And we are deep into this. We have a long way to go to extricate ourselves. And therefore, I am hoping that this evening I'll be able to share some thoughts that I've asked people to consider in my Consider This column last week on this.
Excellent.
Great. So if we can, Phil, before we get too far into it, for the benefit of a lot of people out there who are listening who might not have the same esteemed background as yourself in terms of all of the finances and economy and accounting and all of that, would you just basically describe what is an economy?
That's very interesting. An economy essentially is the activity in which we engage in order to conduct business and social interaction and social interchange. An economy is comprised of various sectors, and typically the economy is comprised of the public sector and the private sector, the public sector being the government, and the private sector, the government and its agencies and ministries, departments, and also the quasi-corporations, the public utilities, which are often owned by and managed by, regulated by the government. And then secondly, the private sector, which really are all of those stakeholders in the economy who are not connected to the government, businesses, companies, individuals who are involved in their own business, non-profit organizations. And so the economy is comprised of both, essentially those two sectors, public and private sector.
So I like your definition because it leads right into the next question I would have before I let Mike chime in, which is for us to define the mindset, the national mindset of, as we look at our economy from a government perspective, from the private sector perspective, and from the people perspective. Mm-hmm. What is in your view, is the mindset of each of those three pillars of our society?
Well, I think the mindset, it's fair to say that the mindset of all three sectors, of those three sectors, although I only define two, that is the public and private sector, and I put people in with the private sector. The mindset is changing. It's changing, and it's changing because of extraneous circumstances and because of global, external shocks that have affected us. We saw it in the Great Recession that started in 2008, when our mindset had to change because we were in a global recession, when the entire world contracted because of toxic financial instruments and the failure of many financial institutions and the companies. And then we saw it again with the earlier than that, about a decade earlier than that. We saw the same kind of thing, although on not as impactful a level, but when the World Trade Center was attacked and all flights stopped and business came to a halt in America, and because it's our major trading partner and the trading partner of many of the developed countries, there was a contraction in the economic activity and therefore the economy. Essentially, the goods and services that were exchanged between public and private sector slowed down. And then more recently and more impactfully, we are now seeing a pandemic. And a pandemic, we often talk about epidemics. Epidemics, where you just have a breakout in a country or in a local areas, a localized community. Epidemics don't normally take on a global character. A pandemic, however, is global in scope, and that is precisely what the COVID-19 experience has been for us. It started toward the end of last year in China and rapidly spread to Europe, rapidly spread to the United States and the rest of the world. And the last time we had a pandemic of this magnitude really was about 100 years ago in 1918, and 2 or 3 years thereafter, when we experienced the entire world experienced the effects of the Spanish flu, at which time there were nearly 40 to 50 million people who died. And that was horrific. In and of itself, it was horrific, because that number is a staggering number. And in addition to that, it also coincided, everything came together effectively. You had the First World War that was taking place, and that also helped to spread the pandemic with American troops traveling around the world because it was believed that the Spanish flu didn't start in Spain. It started actually in Kansas, and was really exported by American soldiers. You don't hear much about that, but that's, you hear about the China flu, but you don't hear about the American flu. We call it the Spanish flu. And there's a reason for that. I'm not going to go into that, but there's a reason for that. So what has happened is that we are seeing in our lifetime now, in the 2020, in this year, 2020, we are seeing a radical shift and a paradigm shift in our thinking and in the way we look at things, because we've been so impacted and so affected by the devastation that's been caused by the pandemic, that we have to rethink, how are we going to make ends meet? How are we going to educate our children? How are we going to provide for education for our children? What about those persons who are in university? How are we going to deal with that? The government has taken a decision in respect of that, and which I won't go into for first-year students. What is going to happen to the thousands and thousands of people who have been laid off in our primary sector, the tourism sector? At least 20,000, I believe it's more than that, but let's say 20,000 of the three major properties. And so that speaks volumes about the impact, and many of them, fortunately, have had have had the benefit of some of those institutions continuing them, at least in a limited way in terms of paying them their salaries. And so when I say it's changing, I mean, it is changing every single day. Our mindset is changing, and we're asking ourselves in the private sector, what can we do to deal with the rapidly changing times in which we encounter? Now, on the other hand, when you look at the other side of the economy, in the public sector, the government is faced with exactly the same kinds of considerations. All governments typically raise money from taxes. When there's little economic activity in the private sector, they don't have the level or the volume of business that is generated, and therefore, normally there's a correlation between the volume of business in the private sector and the revenue that's earned by a government. For example, business license, real property tax, VAT, value-added tax. The more you spend, the more they earn. And if people don't have money to spend, then the government is not going to be able to enjoy the level of revenue, one, that they anticipated, and two, that they've been accustomed to obtaining from the citizenry. And three, they have to ask themselves then, well, how do we go about filling that gap? How much headroom is there for us to increase our taxes on our citizens? There's limited because of limited business activity. And so it really is all connected and intertwined. And so the government too has to rethink and reset its thinking.
So Phil, let me challenge that a little bit.
Sure.
From a psychological perspective, or social perspective, a little bit. So to what extent is the mindset really changing, if in fact because you hear conversations going on where we're waiting for the hotels to reopen, we're waiting for the tourists to come back to the country, we're waiting for this period to end. Mm-hmm. And to what extent, when the hotels are full, when when jobs are in play again, to what extent the mindset would have changed, as opposed to, we have this moment. This is like, I equate this to, we're going through a hurricane. We can't wait for this hurricane to end because we want to go back to the way things used to be.
Right. But I think
extent though, Phil, and I hear you talk about the mindset that we have to change, but with that mindset of, we want things to go back to the way it used to be, go back to normalcy. You hear that language. Mm-hmm. When you hear that language, to what extent has the mindset actually changing or will change?
Right. And I think that's an excellent question, because I don't think that the mindset has yet changed. I think it's a continuum. I think we're in the midst of a continuing process. It's like a river that you're in that's flowing and that you can't get out of, and you're in the middle of the river and you've got to go along with the tide as it flows. And you're going to come to the end at some point, but you're still in the middle of the river. And while you're there dealing with the current, there's not much that you can do. And I think that's precisely where we are. Now, what we're going to have to do, I think it's going to take a while for our mindsets to change for two reasons. One, we are creatures of habit, and we typically like to do things the way we did them before. We like to get up and conduct our daily activities the way we always have. And in fact, I think a clear indication that the mindset had not changed or has not changed is what happened on July 1. July 1, our borders opened. And what did people do immediately? They rushed to do exactly the same thing that they couldn't do in the preceding 3 months. What that did was it resulted in a spike, a tremendous spike, exponential spike in the cases of COVID cases and the number of deaths. And so the mindset did not change during that lockdown period. I think that we are still in the process of changing our mindset. I think that the mindset's going to be a while before it is actually changed. But I think the longer this pandemic is protracted, the greater the likelihood of us having to change our mindset. And why is that? National insurance money is going to run out.
Right.
We're at $150 million. Government is not going to be able to provide continuous support for people as they have in the past. It's going to run out. Jobs are not going to be replaced. At some point, the hotels are going to say, you know something, I've done all I can and I can't do much more. In fact, the hotels now, if you look at the papers today, I think Sandals said that they're not going to open until the end of January in New Providence. I think November in Exuma. And I think the other major hotels, Bahama and Atlantis, have indicated that they are not going to be able to open as anticipated toward the end of this year, or earlier in the next few months. And so what does that mean? It means that people's minds are now going to have to be recalibrated and restructured and refocused to refocus their attention on, okay, now if this is what our new reality is, what we call the new normal, what is it? What do I need to do? What kinds of steps and measures do I have to take? I think the government recognized that they had to relieve some of the pressure, turn the valve off, release the pressure valve, and allow people to go back to work. Because otherwise, those who could work, those who could open, those who are in business for themselves, those who have the good fortune of not having to rely on the hotels and so forth, they had to be allowed to get back out there and engage in some level of the economy, albeit nowhere near what it was pre-COVID. And so as far as changing the mindset is concerned, it's going to take a while. I mean, I don't expect this to be an overnight thing. I don't even expect the mindset to change this year. But I think what's like most things, the people who came out of, good example, the people who came out of the Great Depression at the end of the 1930s, during the 1930s, as a result, principally of government programs, changed their mindset from what they had been accustomed to, and they became much better at saving, much better at planning, at budgeting, at doing the things that they didn't do before the Great Depression. Because you know why? The Great Depression, because it was so prolonged and because it was so impactful and so deep, and it caused them to recognize, well, this could happen again, and so let me have some money put aside for the rainy day in case I have that problem. And so what happened is that there was tremendous growth by the middle class. And why was that? Because a lot of people had opportunities after the Great Depression that they didn't have prior to the Great Depression, and they had changed their mindset and thinking, and then they moved into a new normal until things fell apart again with recessions, and again, as you know, adjustments had to be made. Recessions that took place in every 10 years in the United States, global recessions that took place every 10, 15 years. And so adjustments had to be made, but adjustments are, changing one's mindset is a slow, tedious process. And it has to be driven by the individuals recognizing that unless you do things differently, you're gonna go and get the same results. And so if you don't change your mindset, then what's going to happen? You're not going to be able to feed your family. You're not going to be able to clothe your family. You won't be able to provide education. You won't be able to look after your household. You won't be able to do a lot of the things that we become accustomed to doing. And so it's a long, arduous process. It's not going to happen overnight. And I don't believe it's happened yet. I think it's happening. I see it happening. I see some people now talking about, I can't do this because I want to put some money aside for that. I want to tuck it away, or I'm taking some money to help some other people. That was.
Yeah. So, but Phil, though, and I know you grouped private sector and people together, which I don't really do, but because I think they're two significantly separate constituents of our society. But on the overall line of change, we know that change happens when there's a traumatic event in people, or there's a natural attrition, or there's intentional thought process towards change.
That's right.
And so I'm hearing you say that this is going to take a long time for our mindset to change, but we really can't afford for it to take a long time for our mindset to change. So something has to lead, LEAD, lead the process of change, whether it's the traumatic event of COVID and Dorian and whatever else has happened already, or whether it's through natural attrition, where people who are driving or steering the change, the mindset now has to move off the scene, or we make an intentional effort to steer people into a certain change. And so the question I'm asking is that we have already had a traumatic event and we can't control the attrition, but we could control intentional thought towards the change. So what in your mindset would be that intentional thought, and by whom? The government, the private sector, or the people?
I think it's going to take a combination of all of the above. I think it's going to be, everybody's affected by it. And therefore, everybody's going to have to recognize that they have a part to play in the change, in the process of change. Change management takes place when you encounter, when you hit a roadblock, when you hit up against a wall and you can't go straight forward, then you have to make either right turn or left turn. You just have to you've got to change course. And if you could continue going forward and you hit that wall, you're not going to get anywhere. So you've got to go right or you've got to go left. And so what is going to drive that? What's going to drive that is innovation. What's going to drive that is a recognition that we cannot continue to do things the same way we did them before. A recognition by the government that you can only tax the people so much because after a while you achieve diminishing returns. For people to recognize that there's only so much you could consume during this period because you have limited resources. And so you're right, it takes all sectors, the public sector, the private sector, and if you want to call people separately, put them into another category, they're consumers essentially.
Right.
Consumers are part of the private sector as far as I'm concerned, but I mean, that's okay. But I mean, consumers and governments governments and individuals are consumers. They consume different things. But I mean, if you want to call people consumers, there has to be a change that takes place, and the change has to be led by first of all, a recognition that there is a need for change. You got to recognize you got to change, and if you don't change,
do you think that we have that recognition?
No, I don't think we have yet. I don't think so. I think that some people have it. I think some people have recognized it, and some people are. But let's think about it. How many people do you see peddling food on a daily basis that previously did not do so? What are they doing? They're trying to make ends meet. They recognize unless I get out there and do things a little differently, I'm not going to be able to make any money. And so more and more people are delivering food to business houses and to individuals and to family and friends than previously. That's and at a very low level, a very, very basic level, a recognition that things have changed and that you've got to move with the change. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind. Most people.
Yeah, so Phil, how do we, to Happy's point though, unless we are intentional, and I like that word intentional, if we're not intentional, and I don't see intention go in our conversations, I see more survival. It's like being that lower level of Maslow's hierarchy of need,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're not moving to, self-actualization. Although I know, like you say, it takes a while, but as Happy pointed out, we may not have the time for that to happen because, do we wait for the economy to collapse and then do it? Or do we say, listen, we have to move, we have to course correct, we have to begin to change our conversations, and we need to do this for our own basic survival, yes, but in the long term, for our future growth and development. So how do we begin to engender that intention?
Well, I think you begin by doing the very thing that we're doing right now. Where, your show is called Blueprint for Change, right?
Yes.
And you're an architect, Michael, so you know what a blueprint is, right? It's a plan, right? It's a plan of what you envisage a house or a building looking like, or a structure looking like when it's finished. And if you don't have a blueprint, then it could be haphazardly built, and it may work out, but chances are far better than if you've got a blueprint that you can make it happen. Now, the same is true of our economy. The same is true of our society. We need to go back to the drawing board and prepare that blueprint, the blueprint for change. And in order to do that, persons have got to put their egos aside. They've got to recognize that moving forward, we are really, the term tabula rasa, a blank slate.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's start with a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and we're going to recognize, and we're going to say to ourselves, collectively and individually, as groups, as companies, as individuals, as churches, as investment clubs, in different aspects of our lives, we're going to say, listen, what is it that we can do to affect change? And change doesn't take place often at the very, very high level. It takes place in very small ways, and it ripples through the economy. You're not going to get the government to sit down and say, this is what we're going to do. You're not going to get the companies or private sector to sit down and say, this is what we're going to do. And the people are not going to be able to sit down, won't likely sit down and say, this is what the plan is. Collectively, we need to identify people who have ideas, invite persons to speak about ideas and speak about the things that previously that may have been taboo, that we may have not wanted to touch before, that we may have said, we don't want any part of that, and say to ourselves, there may be some good in looking at a particular thing because it provides some opportunities. And
Yes.
so it requires a collective effort of all three sectors, as you say, the government, the private, the public sector, and the consumers, the people.
Yeah, and so whilst we looking at that, we anticipate or expect that there's going to be a lot of collaboration between those three needed.
Mm-hmm.
But in my view, anything with more than one head is a monster. And so somebody has to lead.
Yes.
Whether it's going to be the government or the private sector or the people. Right now, as far as I could see from various chats and the like, it's the people who is taking the initiative to lead. Now, they might not have the authority or the power at this present time to affect the changes that they are desiring.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that power might be in the hands of government, and definitely there's a lot of power in the hands of private sector, particularly the upper epsilon of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see us just sitting back waiting for the natural change to happen, right? There has to be some education programs, there's a campaign, for specific things that needs to happen in the economy, and maybe we could talk about those after we come back from a break. But in terms of everything, change has to be driven by something. And I agree with you, change happens in a culture from within. You can't force change from outside, but these three entities are within.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of them, somebody have to take the lead. In every major political change we've had in our country, somebody was at the lead. And every economical one we had, somebody took the lead. right? So forth. So
And social change also took place with the grassroots movement. You know,
right,
that transformed into a political movement, but it
correct.
initially started off as a grassroots movement of people and persons who recognized that we didn't want to continue life this way. And so, you know, the whole dynamics of change requires us to collaboratively work together and recognize that there are some things that the government just cannot lead on. There are some things that nobody can lead on but the government. I mean, you talk about borrowing money, you know, the way that we need to borrow money for the benefit of the country, the government is best poised to do that. However, what you do with that money may be better articulated by the private sector and by the people than anyone else. And so it takes collaboration. It takes people working together, and it takes this kind of conversation across this country for people to come together and say, you know, something that makes sense. We should do that because that is going to help us to move from point A to point B. When we come back, I want to just say one thing. We talk about blueprint. We had a national development plan that was a lot of time.
We can touch on that. Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of time, and we sort of put it on. You know, governments change, and therefore it's shelved. But I will bet you there must be things in there that we can pull off the shelf and say, you know something, these things might work now. Now, some of those things may not work because they were built for, or envisaged for another time that does not now exist. For example, you may be speaking about something in the tourism sector that is no longer relevant because we don't have a tourism economy right now. It's a very, very, very low economy. Okay, but I bet you if you go back to that blueprint for change, the National Development Plan, there's something there that would make sense for us to look at and dust off and see whether or not we can tweak them and modernize them and update them in light of where we are today.
Sure.
Great. So this is a good place to take that pause, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take first break. Ali, Mr. Producer, we'll be right back after these brief messages.
Blueprint for Change. A plan to overcome challenges. Blueprint for Change. A guide to help create opportunities. Blueprint for Change. Thought-provoking conversations. Blueprint for Change. Why wait when you can contribute to the Blueprint for Change?
Blueprint for Change, the show designed to change your perspective on how you think about national issues facing the Bahamas. I am your host, along with co-host Dale Knowles, and we're having a very interesting and fascinating conversation. I see our guest has definitely stepped up to the challenge, talking about mindsets, and you were challenging Phil to talk about some of the things we need to begin to focus on. So, please continue that questioning of my dear friend.
Okay, so we've laid the foundation now in terms of what we thought and the like. And so now I think we should migrate or move on to creating that environment for success. And so one of the questions that we had before was what will the economy look like in the new built environment, right? And so when we look at the environment for success, we're not talking about anything related to the past. As you said, I forget the word you used, but I call it a blank canvas.
Yeah, right. Tabula rasa.
Tabulizing.
Tabula rasa.
Tabula rasa. Okay.
Tabula rasa. Okay. Yes. And so if we use the tabula rasa or a blank canvas, and then we decide to now start painting what it is that we want the new economy to look like based on what we know we can have advantages in the like. We talked about in your article a couple of things. You talked about tourism, financial services, immigration, macro and microeconomics, and the framework for the economy. And where tourism over 60% of GDP, 50% of labor. So the question would be is, what if tourism, we can't get in the old model more than 50% or 55% more of our production come back? So what will that new tourism model look like in order to get the remaining 45% plus the 120% that I always felt was left off the table?
Right. Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. Let me start with tourism because that has been our mainstay and will continue to be our mainstay, even though right now it's very anemic and it's not very hopeful that we're going to be able to see a major turnaround anytime this year, certainly. But certainly as we move forward, let's consider this. What if we were to shift the focus of our tourism sector from the mega tourist resorts to smaller resorts that are geared maybe 50 to 100 persons as opposed to thousands of persons?
My mom will hug you from here to China.
Sorry?
My mom will hug you from here to China. You know where she functioned before for many years.
Exactly. You know, and see, let's look at, first of all, let's accept that one. We are so susceptible to external shocks that when those external shocks hit us, they hit us in a very, very big way. We don't cushion ourselves because if you have 2 or 3 mega properties that hire 20,000 people that are affected, then those 20,000 people are going to be adversely affected. Now, what happens if you were to have, like Barbados, for example, smaller properties that are owned by Bahamians? That's another issue that we need to address. That is ownership of our basic economy. Right now, we don't own our economy. Politicians on both sides of the divide for many, many years have been able to justify the large investments in property and property, plant, and equipment in our tourism sector by the number of jobs that are created. But why should we, if you're going to change our mindset, let's change our mindset from being employees to being employers, from being workers to being owners. That's a paradigm shift that needs to take place, I believe, in the tourism sector so that we don't dismiss or disregard or denigrate the large mega resorts that are there, but we expand on the base. Instead of bringing the big branded properties into our country going forward, why don't we look to encouraging, and when I say encouraging, I mean deliberately making a decision to provide capital, land, for people who have the capacity, who have a knowledge of the industry, to be able to build a tourism sector that is more disparate and more distributed. There are islands of this country that many Bahamians have not been to that are more beautiful, far, far more beautiful than Nassau, Island of New Providence. And what has happened? People have really migrated to the center, to the major cities, New Providence and Grand Bahama, because that's where the jobs are. That has sort of reversed itself in Exuma. Exuma, I wouldn't be surprised if the population of Exuma hasn't probably virtually doubled in the last few years because of what Sandals has done. And again, that's not a huge mega resort, and Grand Isle and other smaller properties. Why is it that, and while at least Grand Isle, I think Grand Isle is, I'm not sure, that may be partly Bahamian owned. Sandals is owned by Butch Stewart, a Jamaican. But we should be encouraging our Bahamians to get into tourism. I mean, I take my hat off to Mark Olivesco and his family, what they've done with the Island House.
Right.
I take my hat off to Sir Franklin Wilson, what he's done at Jack's Bay, down in Lutheran. I take off the people who have the vision to get a piece of the pie, of the tourism pie, by going smaller, but focusing on a particular element or a key element of tourism that is segmented in a way that that's attractive to sufficient people out there who will keep your place full all the time.
Well, Happy, your parents did that, right? Your mom.
Exactly. Your mother did
Village
that.
House. Netta Kerr did it with.
Yes.
with her property.
Casuarina.
Yeah. But those properties didn't survive, though, Phil. I mean, it's
they didn't survive in part, one, because I don't know. I suspect that capital may have been an issue. I think that may have been an issue. I believe also they were eclipsed by the large mega resorts.
Right.
Because they were all, they provided everything to the tourists who wanted to come and not leave. I mean, look at the inclusives. Look what we've done with the inclusives in this country.
Yep.
We have allowed people to come here, and they don't even see the Bahamas. They see either their own, and that's it. And there's very, very little benefit that trickles in as a result of that, because the money is paid. The airfare, there's not much in it for us. The hotel occupancy is not much in it for us, because most of the money is paid overseas before you even get here. You don't have to pay tips, or your tips are nominal, and so there really is no trickle-down effect. So if we're talking about resetting our mindset, let us ask ourselves, what do we do about changing our tourism sector that makes it attractive for Bahamians to get involved? And Airbnb is rapidly growing, and I'm not saying that's the solution, but you don't need to have a huge property. You can have one or two properties on different islands, and provided they're properly constructed and the offerings are sufficiently attractive, you can get people who will be coming down and spend the time with you year round. And then Bahamians will own a bigger piece of the pie. That's one simple way
Right.
of affecting the mindset, changing their mindset.
So Phil, what do you suggest we do with, we have three major resorts, right? Alakaya, Bahama, and Atlantis.
Right, and I think there'll always be an appeal for them. I think the market is sufficiently big so that you can appeal to persons who want to go there, but not everybody wants to go there. Some
Right.
people go to Kamalami Key.
Okay.
Some people want to go to Grand Isle. Some people want to go to smaller properties on the Family Islands because they don't want the mega resort experience. They don't need it. That's not what they want. And the market is sufficiently large for you to segment that market, for you to target the market, and for you to try to develop that market of the people who want to come. I mean, I look at look at Coral Sands in Harbor Island.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Harbor Island. They may have 20 rooms,
Right.
They're full year round. You know why? Because they've got people who want to come, who want to go to the pink sands, and they want to enjoy the pink sands from the beach. They don't want a lot of noise. They want to have peace and quiet. They want to be able to go out and have a nice meal. They want to be able to mingle with the people from Harbor Island and have that experience. That, in my opinion, is the way you change the mindset of Bahamians, and it's not that expensive to get involved. Now you may need to, it's going to take initial capital, and the government has always provided guarantees and incentives and concessions for persons wishing to get in the tourism sector. We have not taken advantage of it,
Right.
Why? Because we want a job. We want to, there's nothing wrong with a job. Don't get me wrong.
But Phil, that has been what has been touted, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the kind of treasure to go after the job. I mean, that has always been what has been touted, as opposed to the opportunity.
Right.
Why don't we tout the opportunity instead of the job?
Right. Exactly. Yep. I think a lot of it has to do one with your disposition, some of it with your exposure, some of it with the opportunities you're given early in life. For example, I mean, if I look at myself and I look at other professional people, yourself, for a very, very short time, we had jobs. For 3 years, I had a job at Arthur Young, okay?
Yes.
Another 2 years, I had a job here at Arthur Young, after which I became an owner.
Right.
For the last 40 years, 40 minus 6 or 7, I've been an owner. Now, I've been fortunate enough. I've had the exposure, I've had the education, I've had a lot of things going for me. But there are a lot of Bahamians who have the same thing. And if it's really your mindset. And I really never. Let me put it this way: I never want to be an employee. Okay, in the sense that I have to go to the man's job, and the man could cut me loose any day. He can look at me. If I look at him wrong, or I say the wrong thing, I'm out of there. That's not a good way to live. And so Bahamians, I think, have a great desire to be owners. They just don't know how. They're not given the opportunity. And so we need to re-educate We need to retrain. We need to retool. We need to refinance. We need to recapitalize of Bahamians who have good ideas and help them along the way so that they can grow. I look at Frankie Wilson. Frankie was an accountant like myself. Frankie,
Right.
he left, so Franklin, he left his firm, and he had a vision 20, 30 years ago that he's going to own a piece of this tourism pie. And sure enough, 20, 30 years later, it might have taken a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but sure enough, he's there.
Right.
Okay? That's what it takes. And too many of us believe that it has to happen overnight. It isn't going to happen overnight because that's not the way the world works. Now, when you talk about and so what I'm saying first of all is let's look at that tabarazum. Let's review how we can get a piece of that pie. Let's alter our mindset. Let us also at the same time, more to your question, more to your point, we need to get the government to also use its persuasion and provide incentives and recognize that, if you're going to expand the tax base to give them more revenue, help me get into business or make it easy for this so that I can then produce. And then the government get more money. They've got to change their mindset too and recognize that you're not to be obstructive. And I'm not talking about this government, I'm talking about any government. You've got to create opportunities for Bahamians and concessions that you would give the same people who come in from across the bar so that they would have an opportunity to take advantage of the sun, sea, and the sand that the foreigners take advantage of all the time. In addition to which, let me also mention, I have nothing against the cruise ships and the cruise lines, but we need to recognize that they do not produce much value for us in terms of dollars and money that's spent. Okay.
Well, I guess unless we own them.
Sorry.
Unless we own them.
Well, we don't own them, exactly.
Well, see, go back to your point about maybe we should own them.
Well, see, it may be more difficult because of the competitive advantages they have and because of the economies of scale and the economies of scope. It may be more difficult for us to own them, but we should be getting more from them than we have been getting in the past. For example, why are we allowing these cruise lines to own islands where all the concessions are retained by the company as opposed to trickling into the community? The people who live in the community ought to have the concessions so that they will build their economy, so they can build. There's an opportunity for them, and so again, it takes the government to change its mindset about something. You could come, and you could use this particular island, but a condition for doing so is that all of the services, concessions, and amenities must be owned by, managed, and run by Bahamians. Okay?
Yes.
So, right, and then talk about mindset change. The people who get this opportunity got to recognize they got to work. You can't expect that just because the government say this is our thing. You take advantage of the fact that question is granted to you. You need to produce. The Bahamians have got to be more productive.
Agreed.
So the people have got to change their mindset. And so, Happy, that's how it happens. It happens one step at a time, one sector at a time, one property at a time, and gradually. But it takes a national shift it takes a shift in the national psyche. Okay?
So a couple of things. I think we may have lost Happy and the connection, but you speak, because I just want to challenge you a little bit on what you just said about the Bahamians have to work, but then did we not engender this attitude of entitlement that because you're a Bahamian, you're entitled to certain things?
Yes.
So how do we change that mindset?
That is a deeply rooted. Well, firstly, let me agree with you. I agree with you that we have for too long engendered a sense of entitlement amongst our people, and it goes back to the time. And the union may not like me for this, but it goes back to the time when you automatically given a 15% gratuity, no matter how you performed on the job. 15% gratuity is baked in.
Yeah.
And there's no recognition of whether or not you performed for it. And so that sense of entitlement is something that really has helped to dislodge this whole spirit of entrepreneurship and the spirit of productivity and the need for people to recognize that the mindset's got to be, listen, the harder I work, the more I make. And so, yeah, we've done that. We've engendered that spirit of entitlement. And so, we have, for too long, as a people, we have expected for things to happen for us that we don't expect to happen for other people. We believe that we should be entitled to do some things and to be entitled to some things that we would not expect other people to. I used this example the other day. I got a ride the other day, and a young lady picked me up, gave me a ride from my car service. And I said, please buckle your seatbelt. Nassau. I said,
You're asking her to buckle her seatbelt.
And I said, listen, what do you do when you go to the States? Don't you?
Wow.
She said,
Yes.
I do it. But I said, why? Why do you do that in another person's country? You don't do it in your own country.
Right.
It's because it's the law. I said, it's also the law here, but separate and apart from being the law, it's for your own safety. Long before it was the law.
Yeah.
For years and years, from my father used to tell me, buckle your seatbelt. As soon as you get in the car, you buckle your seatbelt because it's a prudent thing to do. But we believe that we are entitled to do certain things or get away with certain things here that we aren't prepared to take advantage of when we land on the other side, And so we've got to change our mindset in so many ways. And there are going to be some people who say, man, I don't care. I really don't care. Some people are going to say, well, I can do what I want to do. And yes, you can do what you want to do. It's a free society. But if we universally adopt the attitude that this is what we want to do, what's going to happen? We're going to end up exactly where we ended up after July 1, when we opened our borders and allowed people to go away.
Yes.
And then to be disciplined enough. I said to someone yesterday, maybe it was today, Taiwan is a classic case of how to do it right. Taiwan has 23 million people, okay? And they had 498 cases of COVID.
Right.
They had 7 deaths. Up to yesterday, 7 deaths. You know why?
Wow.
Because they had the discipline. Because, well, one, they had the experience from SARS and the swine flu. They also had a leader who was an epidemiologist, the vice president was a Johns Hopkins educated epidemiologist. And so he was able to lead that whole charge. But they also had the experience of the SARS and the swine flu that helped them to get through this. And they also they tested, traced, and they also isolated 250,000 people. And if you did not quarantine as they required you to, you were fined very heavily. And they had a 99.95 compliance rate for quarantine. People did not leave quarantine because they recognized it was in the best interest of everybody.
Right.
After each other. And so it goes back to discipline. It goes back to mindset. It goes back to recognizing that, listen, I have a responsibility to my brother, to be my brother's keeper. I have a responsibility to myself. And unless we adopt that attitude, our mindset's going to take a very, very long time.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Phil. We have a lot of work to do regarding our mindset issue. I mean, you go to other countries and you could feel the discipline,
Yes.
I've had the fortune of being in Dubai for about 5 times because of Expo, but I will tell you, there is a country that understands exactly what it needs to do, and the people also understand the role that they have to play. You violate the rules, they make it very clear, that there are consequences and no one, is removed from it. And I think that's something we ought to be considering exactly how do we do that. I think Happy's still trying to get back in, but one of the issues I want to bring up with you after reading your article today in the newspaper, this citizenship by investment as a strategy. And I've heard about it. I know you mentioned other countries that have used it. I want for you to talk about how we could begin to consider using that as a strategy to help improve our economy. So first of all, help us understand what is citizenship by investment, and then how can we in the Bahamas utilize it or consider utilizing it to assist us in our development?
Right. Okay. Citizenship by investment essentially is the ability to gain citizenship in a country by making an investment of a predetermined amount of money. Okay. This goes by when citizenship could be purchased, obtained for a fee, could be obtained for a fee. Okay. More recently, 1997, when the handover of Hong Kong to mainland China took place.
Right.
A lot of people were terrified because they were plunged into uncertainty about whether or not they were going to be given the full rights and of citizenship that they had under the old regime. That was a British protectorate, British territory. If they'd be given the same rights under the new regime that they had under the old. And therefore, this whole idea of citizenship by investment became very, very popular. And a lot of people moved to, for example, Vancouver. In fact, Vancouver opened up Canada, come in here, and you can become a citizen. That's very different from permanent residence. Okay,
Right.
and the reason is some people need citizenship is because they need to be able to prove that they are a citizen in order to protect their wealth. It doesn't quite achieve that objective. And so citizenship by investment essentially is the ability to obtain citizenship by making an investment. An investment could either be in the form of a contribution to the government, a quantum to be determined, or by the purchase of real estate. And different countries have done it differently. Just so you know that this is not my idea. It's not a new idea.
No,
As
but
I said,
didn't we have something similar? I think it was 250,000, 500,000.
permanent residence.
Permanent
residency.
residency. Right. So you're saying taking up a notch then.
Take it up a notch, move it up a
Okay.
notch, because some people, given the globalization that's taking place in the world today, citizenship is more, much more preferred than residency, because people want to be able to say, I'm a citizen of a particular country because it provides them with certain rights and privileges that they may not have in their own country. And so countries like Malta, Cyprus, Jordan, Turkey, Montenegro, and then in the Caribbean, countries like St. Kitts and Nevis, Dominica, Grenada, and St. Lucia have all some form of citizenship by investment. And they have been able to raise a lot of money. And what typically happens in those cases is, one, you'll find the countries that have CBIs, let's call it CBI, Citizens by Investment, CBI. Countries that have CBI typically have a very high debt to GDP ratio. Ours is approaching 90%, or probably will be 90%. Many of the countries that I've spoken about had also very high debt ratio.
Right.
Most of those countries have small populations. Most of those countries have a CBI program that limits the number of persons who can become citizens to a quota. And in most cases, it's no more than 1.5% of the population. So in our case, 1.5% of people in this country would be about 6,000 people. I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting half that number, 3,000.
Right.
But I think what it does is that it provides the benefits. What are the benefits? The primary benefit is that it enables the government, and also, let me also mention that typically most CBI programs have a sunset clause, which means that at the end of a certain period, the CBI program dies, okay? So it isn't done ad infinitum. It's isn't a perpetual arrangement. It's a fixed period of time.
Okay.
Countries could determine what that period is going to be, and some countries have done, 5 years. Some have done 3 years.
Right.
I've done some just basic, front of the envelope computation, and I've determined that if we were to adopt this, whereby we had 1,000 applicants per year,
Right.
For 3 years, we would earn about $350 billion.
So the average person will contribute how much?
But I didn't figure that out. But it varies, because that's just a total amount. I'm not looking at average.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
I didn't do the average number, but what I did was there are different classes of people, and then there are different.
Okay.
It's different families. For example, it'll be different for a family of two, a family for four.
Yes.
I've not computed the average, but what it works out to over a 3-year period is $1 billion.
Okay.
$1 billion over a 3-year period. And what you have to do is you have to make certain that those persons pass all the tests from Interpol, their own local police program scrutiny. They've got to be impeccable reputations. And there are enough people around. I mean, Canada, for example, when they allowed the Chinese in, they allowed thousands upon thousands of Chinese into Canada. And I'm not suggesting we do that. Again, you know, we have a mindset where we believe that we probably should not be doing that. You don't want to sell your citizenship because that is not really what we're supposed to do. But
well, let's see, that would be one of the arguments, though, Phil. People say now you're selling your country.
Well, no. How could you sell your country if you're selling it to 1.5% of your population?
Well, I'm not saying.
How does that compute?
That would be some people's argument, you know.
But you know, yeah. Well, I mean, you know, they've said that before for other reasons. But
yes,
who could reason? And that could very well be an emotive response.
Of course,
a reasoned response. Nobody who reasons and thinks it through could possibly think that you can sell your country by giving citizenship to 3,000 people, which is what not even 1%
of the population.
Not even 1%. Yeah. That's 0.75% of the population. Yeah. So you know, it's not like the Bahamas for sale. And people will say, well, you know, we don't want all the people coming here voting. Well, the thing is that we do allow people who become citizens to vote, and that's one of the rights of citizenship. However, in most CBI programs, most of them, people don't live in the country of their citizenry. They and if you got to be here 3 months before the elections in order to vote, and I'm sure that, you know, I don't think, you know, it begs the question, how many people are going to come here 3 months before election just to make sure they vote 1.5% or 0.75% of the population? What difference is that going to make?
Yes.
What difference is it going to make to the government? $1 billion. And that's only a direct impact. What about the benefits to the realtors?
Right.
To lawyers, to builders, like architects.
Yeah.
You know, accountants.
Right.
You know, there's a trickle-down effect. There's a multiplier effect that goes beyond the building. The building goes to the government.
Yes.
You know, and that's 1/8. That's 12.5% of our national debt right now.
Wow.
Now you tell me that is not worth looking at. But it takes a change of mind.
There you go.
You're going to reset your mind.
Yes. So listen, Phil, we got less than 5 minutes left.
Okay.
And you know, this happens, as you know, every time we get into these conversations.
Yes.
What I really like about what you have challenged yourself to do, you've challenged yourself to make this a series of articles, and I will very much, you know, suggest that we continue this dialogue, you know, in future. It's an important national issue about making our citizens more aware of what is possible. We shouldn't just be stuck to believe that because something was one way, that is the way it is, and that's the way it has to be.
That's right. Exactly.
So, you know, and it's unfortunate that my dear co-host hasn't been able to get back on, but
we lost him.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you come back, we will make sure you know, this is another challenge that we're facing with this COVID, and that the technology and our ability to connect, you know, becomes even more important.
That's right. Yeah.
So you know, in the last kind of minute or two, give us your kind of wrap up in terms of, you know, where do we go next in continuing this conversation about mindsets.
In terms of mindset, two things I want to leave you with. One is a quote by Wayne Dyer, who said that if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. You change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. In other words, you change your mindset, right? And you change the way you look at things, and then you will see that there are opportunities and possibilities that exist that you previously weren't available to you, or that you weren't aware of, that were right in front of your face.
Right.
Okay. And then the other one, Franz Kafka, one of my favorite, is that there are some things we can only achieve by a deliberate leap in the opposite direction.
Yes.
Opposite direction. And those are both quotes in my piece.
I see that, yes. And I see Happy uses the same quote too.
Oh, he did?
Yeah. So, I mean, the two of you, it's amazing, the synchronicity that exists between the two of you.
Well, the thing about it is that you know what it means? It means that mindsets are changing. It means that people are rethinking one person at a time about how we're going to make things different. Next week, I want to spend some time on Crown Land because I think that's a
gosh.
valuable asset.
Boy, I understand that's a hornet's nest.
Right? Still, it needs to be addressed, and it's right before us.
Yes.
It's our land. This land is my land.
Yes, I remember being told that.
Yes,
is it really true?
Yeah, we need to address that, and so I intend to deal with that. I intend to also deal with tourism and financial services, and what the new landscape is going to look like. It's probably going to be a 4-part piece.
Great. Well, I'm definitely asking you to consider coming back and talk about some of these topics so we can begin to expand the conversation, and I think that's what we need to do.
Anytime at all. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share with your audience this evening. I think that, your talk show is so appropriately named, Blueprint for Change.
Thank you.
You cannot change without a blueprint.
Yes, indeed.
You can't start a business without a business plan.
There you go.
You can't build a house without the blueprints.
Yes, even though some people try.
and so, so we need to recognize that if we're going to work our way out of this, I'm absolutely convinced that we are. We need to recognize that there are things that we've done before that aren't going to work, that in the new normal, we're going to have to reshape, rethink, reset our mindset. And that the more we do that, the more we'll recognize that there are so many answers that lie before us that were staring us right in the face because we didn't have to.
Yes.
We made those changes.
Excellent. That's a perfect way to pause, I call it, not end, but pause.
Okay, thank you.
Until next time.
Thank you, Michael.
So thank you very much, Phil, and happy I trust you are hearing us even though we can't hear you, and hope you get this, the technical aspect of this sorted out the next time. So you've been listening to Blueprint for Change, the show designed to change your perspective and how you think about national issues facing the Bahamas. And please remember to adhere to all of the COVID protocols. We're all in this together, and we like to wish everyone well and have a good night until next week.